All right. So if you would, turn to Philippians chapter 2. And if I could have someone read verses 19 through 30, please. Whoever gets there first, Philippians 2, verses 19 through 30.
But I also cheered I received this about no one else like me who will show genuine concern for your welfare, where everyone looks out for their own interest, not those of Jesus Christ. You know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of God.
No, through 30, please, if you don't mind.
I'm confident that I myself, but I think it's necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also to be sick and take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you. He is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. God have mercy on him, not on him only, but also on me. To spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. So they welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves did not get.
Thank you for reading that. So, quick recap. In chapter 2, we've been talking about the work of the church, how they need to grow, what they need to be doing as they move forward. And at the point where Adam has just read for us, he then has a little bit of a break and he starts talking about Timothy and Epaphroditus and says, I'm sending Timothy to you soon, which is great because the church in Philippi knows Timothy. He helped get them started. As they were on the second missionary journey, Timothy stays behind with Luke and presumably helps grow and cultivate the church there. So this is a founding member. This is someone who has been instrumental in growing them. Now, he's going to stay behind for a time being, but will be headed there soon. Because he's going to continue to provide support for Paul. In the meantime, though, he's going to send Epaphroditus. And Epaphroditus hasn't come. He was supposed to, but we learn now from this letter that he was sick, and sick to the point of almost death. And upon knowing that the state of the church, he was more concerned about them and their well-being than he was about his own. So we get to see who will be coming, and a lot of people, there's a consensus among biblical scholars that Epaphroditus is probably the person who brought the letter to the church in Philippi. But anyway, so I want to take a second and I want to look at the three people that we are talking about in this letter: Paul, Timothy, Epaphroditus. So in Paul, we have someone who's an instructor, a mentor, a founder of the church, and a father figure to that whole congregation, who's writing a letter to them to help grow them, to refine them, give them a status update on how he's doing. But throughout the whole message, Paul's message is not one of, I'm real nervous, I don't know how it's going to go. He practically can't even be bothered to talk about it. Instead, he tells them how much he longs to see them. This is a joyful letter, one where he's excited about them, he's glad for them. He's not shy about his abounding love for them. So we have a pivotal member, and we also have someone who really shows a true loving spirit like Christ does. Like he has also extolled in this letter about how Christ was so selfless, so willing to serve others. And we see that echoed in Paul's character throughout the letter. And now to look at Timothy. So Timothy is genuinely concerned for their welfare. Again, like Paul, eager to see them, eager to help them grow. And we see in verse 21 that that Timothy is unique from many in Rome because they seek their own interests. But Timothy, on the other hand, seeks what Christ wants. So he's also compared to being like a son to a father. So we get to see the relationships and the kind of almost the purity test of Timothy here. But he'll be staying behind. Any thoughts on Timothy or anything that we want to expand on Timothy before we talk on Epaphroditus? So Epaphroditus is a brother, keeping the family kind of thing going here. A fellow worker, fellow soldier, messenger, minister, a man of many talents, many skills are being brought to the table here. The Greek name Epaphroditus is in Greek more like Epaphroditos, which means lovely and particularly with a sense of devotion. And it comes from the same root word that Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, is named after. So this is someone who is named in such a way as to denote that he is a lovely, devoted person. And as I've alluded to, he was ill, but he's not concerned about that. He's more concerned about getting to the church in Philippi. So with all of this said, what can we take from these three men? Like when we stack them all up, what do we see? What do we see as the lowest common denominator? Looking at you guys. Any thoughts? What do we see when we look at these three men? Thank you. Yeah, they have a joy for the Lord. They're willing to do the work no matter what the cost is. Thanks for playing. Any other thoughts about what we see with these guys? Any thoughts on these guys? Anything that you'd like to bring out about their character?
Paul urges the Philippian brethren in verse 2, fulfill my joy by thinking the same way, having the same love, sharing the same feelings, focusing on one goal. That seems to be what these guys are doing. That's an apt description of the love and the care that Timothy and Epaphroditus and Paul have, not just for the Philippians, but for Christians, for the work of the gospel.
Yeah, it's almost like we're talking about the same person because they're showing that unity of focus, unity of mind, and yeah, I mean, it really goes to show how in sync they are. Yeah, thank you for that, Adam. So we see a group who's very given to their service of the church in Philippi. So as they do this, as they perseverate on getting to the church in Philippi, as they, as Epaphroditus, who even upon death's door is thinking about how to help them, and is grieved because he's afraid, he's ashamed about their grief. For him, he's like, no, don't worry about me. I'm worried about you. How does this exalt Christ? What does this say about Christ? Like, what is this outpouring? What is this devotion to Christian service do for Christ? Glorifies him? Yes. And how does it glorify him? Yeah. Yeah, taking care of a member who's in prison by doing that good work for anything from the individual to the church is exactly what Christ asks of us, to love one another as ourselves, and to to love Christ. All of their work is given towards serving God and doing what he asks of us. you, Mary. So we have men who are continuing to exalt Christ in everything that they say, everything that they do. They they trying to think of how to articulate it. They continue to just they continue to support how great Christ is through everything that they're saying and doing. Everything amplifies Christ, and there's a beauty of how there's a beauty to be emulated here of when we go about our day. Is everything that we say and do glorifying God? And if not, how much of what we do glorifies God? Can people, through our example, see Christ in us? So what can we do to be more like Epaphroditus, Timothy, Paul, to kind of, if we were to take this to heart this week, what could we do, even a small thing, to be more like these three that we have as an example? Help others. Okay. So spread the gospel, share the gospel. Thank you, Mary. So in addition to that, what else can we do? You can't copy her. Don't just restate it. What can we do to be more like Paul, Epaphroditus, Timothy this week? How can we show the love of Christ in what we say and in what we do? Hint, hint.
I think the first thing we have to do is set our minds. You gotta go in with intentionality over the next week or however long. With that thought in mind, doing nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. I will this week do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. And that kind of helps clarify my vision as far as looking around and saying, okay, how can I live in that manner?
Yeah.
Practical ways, but
No. That's great. I mean, the more structure we put to it, the better. If we go in with intentionality, with the purpose of guiding our thoughts and what we're going to do throughout the week, it's a lot easier to enable something that we've decided we're going to work towards. So yeah, no, that's a practical example. It's much more about guiding what's to come, but it's still essential. It's still a great thing to undertake. I won't belabor this point, but I think you all see where I'm going with this. Like maybe this week, if you are so inclined, think about how you can exude Christ in everything that you say and do, that we can show the love of Christ, that we can drive the message of Christ in what we say and do, and that people can see that devotion to others and their health, spiritual health especially, and to glorifying Christ all throughout. Oh. Can also pray. I love that, because the prayer does two things, right? It's focusing, getting back to the thought of saying, this is what I want to do, maintaining that intentionality. But it's also, prayer also has us recognize that I need Christ to help me do this. I need Christ and God to be, I need Christ to intercede for me. I need, to go to God because I need his support all throughout. It's making sure that at all points you're kind of recentering, like Wednesday night services. We're getting ourselves back to our thoughts throughout the week. Yes, I love that, Lisa. Thank you.
I think that's probably a good answer to pray. I don't know why my mind doesn't go there more often, but that's probably the solution to a lot of problems that we don't realize it's a solution to, at least me personally. Because we're talking about intentionality of it, I was realizing it's so much easier for me to sit here and think of examples of when I haven't done it, is rather than be proactive and focus on, well, doing it the next time. It's like the next time I'm going to screw up, and after I screw up, I'm going to think back and say, aha, I screwed that up. Whereas the order's backwards. You want to think of it first and think, oh, no, better not screw this up. Better do what Christ would have you to do. But unfortunately, I don't always have that intentionality. And as I was sitting here trying to think of a solution to that, and I like that idea of praying. And, you know, you're right, it does, even if God weren't there listening, even if he like took a break for a minute, it would still focus you on it. But there's that other half of it that we gotta focus on too, is that God is listening, Christ is listening, and you have to believe that they're able to help you. I think a lot of people struggle with that, sort of the sense of, I'll ask Christ to do this for me, and then I'll go do it. Then I have to be the one to do it.
Mhm.
And it's sort of impossible to sort of grasp this idea that Christ is transforming us, because we don't always see it happen. It happens as I've been a Christian, and supposedly Christ is to transform me into a new creature, but it doesn't seem to have happened. You know, why hasn't it happened? And what I was thinking, I know I'm going on, but what I was thinking of, when you're talking about knocking, if you look at an analogy where your guy keeps knocking, to keep praying, so keep knocking over it, I think that you have to keep praying for it until you get it. You know, if you pray God, Jesus, transform me into a creature, and then after, 30 years, you're still struggling with the same thing. You just need to pray all the more that Christ does that.
Mhm. Yeah, I love everything that you've brought to the table. So thank you for that. Trying to think, I don't even want to build on it. Like everything you've laid out there is great. Now I feel like I'd be doing it a disservice to try to add anything to it and tack something terrible to the end of it. But thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. So praying, seeing if we can teach to others, seeing what we can do, being intentional about how we decide things. This is all how we can separate ourselves and how we can glorify Christ through everything that we say and do. Yes. Mhm. 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 Yeah, having that time management and saying, this isn't an instantaneous thing that I do. The change that I want to implement is not something that just happens. It's something I have to keep praying for. It maybe even years. So setting aside the time for it is also essential, because if you say, oh yeah, I'll pray, but you don't say when you're going to pray, or have that management of like when and how you're going to do it, it's doomed to fail, because you haven't really ingrained is the wrong word. You haven't accounted for it in the stock of what you have of time. You need to figure out, oh yes, I'm going to proportion this much out. Yeah, I thank you for that, Brett. Sorry, my bad. But yeah, we yes.
All the, through all these things, it takes effort on us.
Mhm.
That we have, in order to be like these men and, have the mindset that they had, we have to try. It takes effort on our part to do it.
Yeah, to close the circle here, we need to go in with intention. We need to time manage, or we need to manage our time for it, and we need to put in the effort. Once we've done all that intentionality, we need to then say, and here's the work. Here's the closure of that loop. Yes, sir. So we can, as we go throughout our lives and as we work with others, be intentional, manage our time well, so that we do say more and more of our time goes to Christ and to his service and to encouraging others in the faith, and then putting in that good work. So we can be more like Epaphroditus, Timothy, Paul, all people that we can aspire to be, especially Paul for that matter, someone who is so instrumental for how we understand the Bible today. I had this as a question, but we've already kind of touched on it, but I'll put it out there because I don't want anyone to necessarily answer this out loud. But if you saw someone during the week, would your love and genuine nature be obvious to everyone you see? Can people see Christ in you as you go throughout your day? Is Christ exalted by every action that you put in? So maybe take some time, purpose some time today, go in with intentionality and evaluate. Where maybe do I need to polish a little bit more to shine better throughout the week? To transition from that, we see three men who are really glorifying Christ. And when Paul is telling them earlier in this chapter that no one is quite like Christ, who humbled himself, who lowered himself down to be sacrificed, to be put on, to be crucified for the forgiveness of our sins, as a way of telling us that we need to be humble, we need to be self-serving, or we need to not be self-serving, but selfless. We then have, as an example, at the end of the chapter, three men who are doing exactly that. So just to point that out, that we have, Paul's not only telling us we should do that, but we have three great examples of people who do. All right. Any thoughts before we move on to chapter 3? Maybe not even related to what we're talking about, but about chapter 2. Okay. So in chapter 3, we're going to have one main focus for the whole thing, which is warning and caution about false teachers and deceivers. And then as we get into chapter 4, we'll learn about the fate of false teachers and deceivers, and we'll have some closing remarks and things like that. Caleb, would you mind reading Philippians chapter 3, verses 1 through 4 for me, please? Oh, anyone else? Sorry, we're looking for anyone else.
For we in circumcision, who worship by the Spirit of God and glory in Christ Jesus, and put no confidence in the flesh, though I myself have reason for confidence.
Sorry for calling you out like that, but thanks for reading. So we pivot from Epaphroditus and his care, and that he's coming to beware, look out for the dogs. That's the phrase I'm looking for. So tonal shift. we get woken up. And so Paul doesn't mind repeating himself. In verse 1, he tells us, I don't mind repeating myself. I'm going to exhort, I'm going to warn you about this. On his first visit, the founding of the church in Philippi, he brought those apostolic decrees from Jerusalem and writes to them again about the demand that about the big demand that was coming to Gentile Christians about being circumcised. So here he is warning them. So verse 2 says, beware of dogs. Do cat lovers now get to go, I could have told you about that. I could have told you about that. Or does he mean somebody else? It's a rhetorical question. Obviously, he's not talking about dogs. So Paul is talking about, and sorry, I'll take it one step further. When he uses the metaphor of dogs, does he mean domesticated dogs? I got a head shake. So no, he's not talking about domesticated dogs. He's talking about wild dogs. And so can anyone describe for me how dogs are in this area of the world and at this time period?
They scavenge. They eat pheasants. So they just go around.
Yeah, they're scavengers. They've got that pack mentality. They are going around like raccoons, just getting whatever they can get, and then they're a nuisance. They're a pest for people of this day and age. And Paul is using this in an ironic way, because he's using this to, as we're going to read further and further through verse 16, he's talking about the Jews. But he's using a term that the Jews often used about the Gentiles. They used it as a slur to refer to them as a baser people, as nuisances, and so they use that as a term for outsiders. And here Paul is flipping it and talking about the very people that liked to use it, and uses it to say that the Gentiles are now the civilians or are the people being badgered by dogs. So dogs are used here in a very negativistic way. If someone will turn to Isaiah 56, and when you get there, read verses 9 through 11. Isaiah 56, 9 through 11.
All you beasts of about one sick order. All men are blind, they are all dumb, cannot work. Sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Yes, they are greedy dogs, which never have enough. And they are shepherds who do not understand. They all look to their own way, everyone for his own gain, from his own character.
Right? They're greedy. They're just going to devour whatever they can. They're dumb. They can't even manage to speak. So we see one instance in scriptures about how dogs are I'm just trying to kind of build a case for how dogs are viewed. If I could have someone turn to Matthew chapter 15 and verse 26, and a second reader turn to Luke 16 verse 21. Whoever gets to Matthew, if you'll start there for us. Matthew 15 verse 26.
And
The
yet,
fact that makes the children afraid, it's children to the dog.
So it's a scavenger, again, something that you take the bread and cast it to the dogs. You don't hand it off, you cast it, deal with it, at a distance. Luke 16 and verse 21. So they not only cleaning the table again, but they'll go and they'll lick Lazarus's sores. So something that would be willing to lick sickness. In Proverbs 26 and verse 11, we have dogs as a dog that returns to its own vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. And as someone who has two corgis, I have watched them both eat their vomit, and it is the most revolting thing. It's easily their worst trait, because you're just like, why? I know it was in, but now it's out. Don't put it back in. And that's a pretty recognizable thing or I think we all recognize that passage. So these are creatures. This is an identity that's of something abominable. They're not faithful. They're greedy. They're always, working towards worldly things. Nothing higher minded here, just base instinct. And so Paul uses that here to say, look out for the dogs, look out for the evildoers, for those who will come and mutilate flesh. So, and to circle in on evildoers for a second, these are people who work at it. It is not just a passing thing. It is their work. It is something that they are striving to accomplish. And taking it to that base thing again of the pulling this thing of dogs. You know, it's almost like they're so predisposed to it. It's all they can think about. It's a baser thing that they're trying to enact. So these Judaizers are working for evil. So he tells them that they need to watch out for the circumcision, for those who are pushing for physical circumcision, who are trying to enact something physical on the outside of the body for what Paul is starting to say here is a spiritual circumcision, a spiritual glorifying of God. Why do the Jews want to do this? Why do the Jews push for circumcision? That was the law. To be able to say, here's an outward showing of my faith. I have been circumcised. And now they're trying to put that, they're trying to kind of align Christianity to the only thing that they've ever known. To say, well, if this is just a continuation, then all I have to do is attach this on and just tack it to the end like a coda to a story. But they are mutilating the flesh by pushing for this. So he says, for we are the circumcision. We being the church. We are the circumcision. He's saying there's no need to cut the foreskin. Instead, what we do is we have already excised that part of ourselves by worshiping the Spirit of God and glorying in Christ. And so he has no confidence in the flesh. Though he then says, though I myself have some confidence. And we're going to see that continue to be talked about in verses 5 through 16. So what's the problem here? Like, why does Paul want to make sure that the Jews are not pushing this on Gentiles? Yeah. But there's a perfect answer. It's exactly what I was looking for, which was that Christ has come to just basically destroy the old law, to say this system that was supposed to be the way of achieving forgiveness, of true worship to God, is not how this is going to go. It has been fulfilled through me. I have broken the cycle. You now, don't have to rely on a yearly sacrifice. You don't have to do all of these things. Instead, I have broken the cycle, and now what I have laid out for you, which is not changing one iota of the law, but fulfilling it, is where you need to be putting your attention. And so the Jews here are coming back to then say, well, we need to keep the old law and add this to it. They're wanting to essentially keep the rule system that they had fallen into because it was a trap. They had removed the relationship with God to say, I checked the boxes, we're good. They had forgotten the relationship of God. And so they forgot that they're to be worshiping God, that they are keeping a relationship. Instead, it was, I'm good, and everything that I do is what creates my salvation. Did I miss anything in that summation? Either Mary or rest of the group? There are much smarter teachers in here than me. So I'm going to press this a second longer. Why not anything physical? Why isn't there a balm or a salve or a physical thing that does it? faith in Christ is what does it. Because this forgiveness and everything with it comes from Christ. He has the divine authority. No physical object has that ability. And so we can't rely on something physical. Yes, Haley. Yeah, yeah. I love it. Not having that physical thing that what essentially becomes a crutch of like, I have supported myself. My own works have justified my salvation. We then have to rely more on Christ. And so when we start building those things that allow us to say, I'm supporting myself, we forget the true focus. Is that agree, disagree, caveat? Okay. So we have,
It's also putting a stumbling block, and something that's going to prevent people from coming to Christ. You can imagine at the end of the invitation, someone comes forward to be baptized, and now you say, well, first of all, have you been circumcised? You're like, no, I haven't. Well, you got to take care of that first, then come back, and then you could be baptized. So the Old Testament is a big rule book, and to make sure that someone is obeying all those rules, and then once they become a Jew, then they can become a Christian. It's going to become a block to people becoming a Christian. I don't really know that you see places in the New Testament where they're really explicitly saying that you Jews who are still circumcised in your children and you don't important, you got to stop. You know, don't report if you're a Jewish Christian. But it seems like they're perfectly fine for a Jewish Christian to keep on living like you always been living. But the moment they try to make someone else become a Jew, before they can become a Christian, they start impeding the work.
yeah, putting those stumbling blocks then arrests that person's ability to begin doing the good work. And we should never do that with Christians. And Paul especially understands that. Right after his trip to Philippi, he gets accused of not really following the Jewish traditions. And so Paul, instead of going, no, that's not the case, he then goes and does his, I forget how many weeks it is, but his little show of attrition, and he keeps going to the synagogue to say, see, I'm following this thing that otherwise absolves me of my problems. So he's not even willing to let even a false accusation be a stumbling block to people who would listen to him. So thank you. Like, not having stumbling blocks, but also making sure that people don't start attaching things to salvation that don't need to be there. This may be TMI. I watched a circumcision once, and this little baby boy, they strapped him into this like vacuum form thing, and they cut it away, and they'd put straps on his arms and legs, and he gave this little like chin quiver, and I was just like, oh, that poor guy. And she pulls out this tube of Vaseline and makes this like ice cream cone whip thing over top and pops the diaper on him, and he poops himself. And I was like, I would have done the exact same thing. There's no way I could have handled that as an adult, much less as an infant. I would have pooped and started crying too. I mean, yeah. But yeah, this is something that would be a wound on an adult for people who are going to.
Circumcised the being before Mary died. Think the very next verse was 3 days later, when they were still in pain.
Yeah, there's no modern medicine to this. You have now created an open wound that has to heal itself around an area that can get very dirty. And this could be a life or death situation in the wrong hands. And it was something that caused pain for days afterwards. And the Jews are like, actually, you need to do that before you can get going. So Paul is very adamant that this is not to be introduced. This is not to be brought to the church. Let's see. So, and instead of asking this as a question, because I think I'm running out of time here. Yeah, I am. Yeah, see, notice that even within the first verse, or first couple of verses of this, how different the condemnation is here of compared to chapter 1 of the Romans who were still teaching Christ, though doing it for, self-aggrandizement, versus Jews who would try to bind the old law. He still talks about them as though everything that they're doing is acceptable, and he doesn't offer any kind of condemnation for them. But he then says within verse 2 of this, they are dogs, they're evildoers. And they're mutilating flesh. So there's a real alacrity. There's a Paul treats this with a much greater severity because this is something that really does not need to be reaching into the formation of the church. And Paul will talk about this in Colossians chapter 2 and verse 12. Paul says Christians have put off the body of sins and are circumcised. He will continue to make this a calling card, a constant reminder that circumcision is now a spiritual showing. It is not a physical outshowing. By pushing for circumcision, it removes the confidence that being baptized has the power to save. Instead, it starts saying, like Haley was saying, that physical showing, it shows a concision of the heart because they did a physical act. And the Jews had really lost that idea of righteousness as a relationship with God. They'd seen it more as a fleshly thing, something that they did as a checklist. I'm trying to think how to, yes, sir.
One thing that this guy referred to, he described it as mutilation of the flesh.
Mhm.
Well, for one thing, if you think back to temple worship, those who had been mutilated could not participate in temple worship. They were not allowed within the temple grounds.
Mhm.
And so there's kind of a subtle irony there, if he's making a play on that in circumcising to be clean or holy, they are actually making themselves or insisting on people becoming unholy by mutilating themselves, and thus could not be associated with the Spirit of God. And yet in Acts 15, the whole crux of the matter is circumcision. Paul, or the gentlemen there that are debating say that God had made no distinction anymore.
Yeah. And I don't think that using that kind of language and flip-flopping that able to be in temple worship and mutilation would have escaped Paul. I think he, knowing him, his training background and everything, he would have been using that very purposefully to say, see how I'm driving this home. I mean, because presumably some people in the church in Philippi were Jewish themselves. So to read this would have to be pretty shocking, for Jews to say, you're, by pushing for this, you're akin to a dog. By pushing for this, you are mutilating yourselves. That I would like to think that was not lost on anybody who was sufficiently versed in Jewish law and doctrine to then say, to miss such a parallel. Thank you, Adam. And can we determine from these first 4 verses, wrong slide, that Jews are already pushing for this, that this is already inside the castle walls? I don't think so. I don't think we can say at this point that the Jews are pushing for this. I think there's nothing to suggest that this is already happening. don't see any language here that particularly indicates that it is, but I think that this is truly a don't fall into this. Don't let this start. Recognize it before it happens. And that is time. So thank you all for the great discussion. We'll pick up here next week. Thank you and good morning.